today. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you've been part of earlier events, everybody's equally and very welcome. In the spirit of how we've organised things before, we very much look forward to listening to you and your contributions. And in particular today, we're really pleased and particularly welcome Anna, Becky and Kerry, who are going to be presenting, are going to be in conversation with Linden and Sharon, and are then going to be open to discussion with us all. Last Friday, I circulated the reflection I wrote with Sharon's contributions on our emerging thinking about the research circle and different ways of troubling adult education. And in that document, we included references to work that's shaped our own thinking. Today, I'm not going to read all of that reflection, but what I'd like to do was perhaps highlight three themes and begin to ask how our own contemporary thinking may relate to the work of Raymond Williams. So firstly, and we've touched on this before, but to emphasize, the first theme around senses of loss, closure, but also hope. As many of you know, that members of the research circle began to meet in autumn 2020. And since then, we've organised 3 events each year, starting in spring 2021. And we can share details and links to the Centenary Commission website after today or in the chat that people could read afterwards. So through those events, we know adult education and more broadly lifelong learning are in crisis. We know that funding and opportunities for higher and adult education and different forms of life-wide learning are narrowing. And in these times, and since we ourselves have met from 2020, we have experienced personal loss and shared senses of struggle and collective hope too. And I think what's become really important is how the ways in which we've lived with those losses in our families, amongst close friends, but also acknowledging and weaving through that profound changes to industries and communities. And each time we ourselves have met, we've kind of emphasized that throughout our work, there are numerous instances and ways in which that the personal is always political. So, for example, in earlier research circle events, we've remembered the profound impact of the miners' strike in 84-85 and the devastation to communities that followed. We equally know, or also know, how the pottery industry has suffered its own devastating closures, particularly since the 70s, and the deep consequences for communities in Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire. To emphasize the links with the personal, stories of and research, for example, shared by Sharon, have reflected on the life of her own father from miner to Ruskin College, Oxford, and then his work as a social worker back in Derbyshire. And from Linden, his own research, including distress in the city, revisiting Stoke-on-Trent, and ways of making sense of the complexities of the far right, who at one point took control of wards on the local council in Stoke, where Linden grew up. And in each instance, what we've been doing, as we know, and for those joining us today, is asking why these contemporary crises and life stories touch on the histories of adult education, but also of resources of hope. And we will come on to those resources, but before we do, we know that we live and work in what in so many ways feel like bleak times. For example, the senses of rupture and closure. Universities, staff and students are suffering the uncertainty and prospects of the closure of whole departments and of individual courses. For example, Universities UK have reported that many universities, responding to their own survey, are making cuts and reducing investment in repairs and maintenance. And in one specific example, the University of Nottingham has suspended recruitment to, for example, music and languages, and proposed to close these and numerous other courses, including theology and religious studies, social work, architectural design, and 2 of the university's nursing courses and its BA education. For example, within that BA, Curriculum and the Politics of Knowledge, which is a module that Sharon has taught for the last 6 years, has been recognised for fostering critical thinking about education and who controls it, and it's attracted local and mature students. And we kind of acknowledge that those one sets of examples from Nottingham would be shared by others on the call in their own settings as well. But secondly, second theme and related, we ourselves have thought critically through our events about national and indeed international contexts. And we've asked how policies embody in so many ways hollowed out practices. So again, a contemporary example, in September 2025, the Labour government has introduced a white paper on post-16 learning. And what is so striking is the minimal reference to adults, their education and opportunities for learning. And one illustration was a recent WA blog that gave as a measurement in a 38,000 word document, adults are mentioned 0.13% of the time. So that blog argued that rather than this being a post-16 white paper, it's really a pre-24 white paper. And as we were beginning to think about this, and I was kind of going back to some earlier discussions we've had, and those particularly with Sharon and I and with others, it raises the question about how that white paper now, that contemporary white paper, compares with previous Labour government, for example, the Green Paper, The Learning Age in 1998, and the white paper that followed. But research and commentary has suggested that that contemporary emphasis on skills, the one in the white paper that's just come out, in many ways echoes that narrow and utilitarian focus on human capital. So we know that the previous government did think, for example, in terms of individual learning accounts and neighbourhood learning development, but examples of research highlight those contradictions. So, for example, one way of thinking about that might be through Stuart Hall and the idea of this double shuffle, a shuffle between dominant practices and other opportunities, but ones in which a narrow vision of skills for work dominate. And it may be in later discussion today, if he wishes to, that John Holford may want to expand on his writing on this theme, including an article that I included in that reflection that John wrote with Jonathan Mickey. So, moving through to the last stage. If the first 2 themes related to loss and closure and hollowed out practices, my final theme by way of reflection and introduction is thinking about the power of willful remembering and ways of enriching contemporary thinking. So, for example, how are there glimmers of light sustained by William's reference to resources of hope? And very briefly, paraphrasing his work in 1961, which itself relates to earlier work in 1958, this idea of culture from the abstract to the particular. Yeah? The idea familiar to many of us that culture is ordinary, from the abstract ideal to concrete, from texts to the context of institutional life and ordinary behaviour. And perhaps I thought what particularly relevant today is that his argument that the art is there as an activity with the production, the trading and the politics. And for us, we must study those actively. So how can we begin to develop connections between that introduction there to Williams and related thinking? So briefly, by way of introduction, two ways of thinking about reimagining life-wide learning and connecting with Williams. The first example, which Sharon's going to just take us through, is work that she has shared with us through her own discussions with Nick Mahoney, based on the idea of estate learning and ways of responding to dominant practices through creative and radical practices on the margins. And I think as I read this, it related to all sorts of other discussions I've had with others on the call today. But Sharon, did you want to just, because this is you wrote this very powerfully, and I wondered if you wanted to just take us through it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. Just to briefly, I came across this, as Ian said, through Nick Mahoney, my colleague and friend from the Raymond Williams Foundation, with whom I'm doing some writing at the moment about learning and also about control of learning at neighbourhood level. And he put me onto this very profound and stirring set of posts by Dee Hunter called The Estate Left. And this is Dee Hunter's thoughts and recordings of 4 years of work that he's undertaken as field work for his own thesis. But this is come on the back of many years of organising and facilitating work in working class communities across the Midlands and the North. And he's very much interested in real relationships without hierarchy at community level, and really trying to get past the whole idea of professional partnerships to a form of neighbourhood work which is led by grassroots local activists. It's powerful, but it's also extraordinarily difficult, this work. And he describes his purpose as really thinking about class, trauma, accountability processes, organising, whiteness and community, and anything else that comes for him into that mix. But there's something very profound about the idea of the fragile solidarity that he talks about, the importance of trust at community level. And he's very committed to the idea that the reason, for that very reason, because it's based on trust and self-organisation, which I think is really powerful, they do keep their distance quite actively from NGOs, from councils, and from professional activists, because they've learned what dependence costs. And so what they recognise from any formal funding regime, and this is a lesson that I've learned myself, is that it can involve a kind of diminution of the work due to reporting frameworks, oversight and dilution. So he said very powerfully, I'll just read this bit out. Professional partnership turns struggle into a service. So the organising stays informal by design, cash donations, peer agreements, word of mouth accountability. That informality isn't a lack of structure, it's a form of political hygiene. And I think that's really important. He argues finally that the estate left is the contemporary form of working class politics in Britain, decentralised, improvised, materially grounded. It turns survival into struggle and struggle into structure. It's not waiting for the left to return to the estates. It's already there, reorganising life under its own terms. Thanks, Ian.
No, thanks, Sharon. I think that for me, reading that, there were then connections, and this is my kind of final reflections by way of introduction, is with ideas of invisible education. And I'm delighted today that we're joined by Claudia Blandon, who is working with Josie Quinn on this research. And these ideas of invisible education, after I'd met with Josie, I thought that there were connections in turn with some work I've begun to do with an ex-student, and I'm delighted that Lindsay's with us today with her husband Andrew, which is around work on creative minds and working in South Staffordshire with parents in terms of their support to do with children and families where those children and young people have got ADHD, autism, and other forms of learning. And we can perhaps look at that, because why does that connect? It's, for me, around those ideas of both intentional but also incidental ways in which we learn in everyday life, and how those incidental ways are shaped by earlier experiences of education, but also the ways in which they relate to broader questions to do with education and social justice, but how, in that example, Lindsay and Andrew have begun to work with other parents and are beginning very informally to do work, in many ways, kind of struggling with that local authority and that creativity that Sharon's just talked about, that working around the edges. And I think that there's things here which relate to what connects both and may relate to our wider work, are ways of how everyday life might connect with work, home, and, in the context of that work of Josie and Claudia's, in nature in different ways, in activism and volunteering, and what I think is particularly pertinent for Anna, Rebecca, and Kerry's work around diverse forms of the arts. So that's what, for me, brought some of those together. So my kind of final thought, and one of the questions today, was how those different forms of everyday creativity, activities that are particular and are set in particular places, how those activities may disrupt those dominant and narrow, hollowed out practices that are referred to earlier. So these are hopefully connections, those notions around loss, hope, and what we've just spoken about, that we may want to tease out in the presentations and in the wider discussion. So really looking forward to contributions from Anna, Becky, and Kerry about their work and each of your contributions. And to take us to the next stage, Linden, over to you to welcome Anna and Becky. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Sharon, for those provocative thoughts. Just to check on the timing. It's 20 minutes now for Anna and Rebecca to present. Yep. 20 minutes dialogue between the three of us, and then 20 minutes for open discussion, because we're running slightly late. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we're going to do some reimagining at a very neighborhood level with Rebecca and Anna. I'm really delighted to welcome them to join with us in the work of the research circle. Anna is Professor of Art and Society at the University of Staffordshire, and Rebecca is co-coordinator or co-director of the project alongside Anna. Just to link back for a moment, I introduced the Portland Inn project in our May seminar, set within a city, Stoke, of course, so emblematic of many places where rapid deindustrialization, the decline of working class self-help traditions, and the hollowing out of representative democracy has been especially marked, and where short-termism has been rife. Projects begun and then abandoned. One example was something called the Pathfinder Project, ironically using the same name adopted for the mass bombing of Germany in the Second World War. Except in the case of Stoke, houses were demolished but never replaced. Hanley, in the centre of the city, became a mass of car parks where communities had once thrived. Hopes raised, then dashed under the mantra of austerity, a very familiar story. But then I came across Charlotte Higgins writing, who comes from Stoke, by the way, writing in The Guardian and reminding us of projects that, like a phoenix, rose from the ashes. And she made particular reference to Portland Inn. The project has sought to reinvigorate a small area of 500 houses left over from the Pathfinder debacle. Anna Francis and her partner bought one of the £1 houses on offer and began working with the community to convert an old pub into a centre for the arts and community regeneration. Doing so, she and her colleagues have insisted from the bottom up. Charlotte writes about people like Anna, what artists do is dream up narratives, she says, stories. They imagine different futures, a source of hope, to use Ian's framing and Raymond's, of course. And this is the power, as I see it, of what's happening, an exercise in potentially radical participative democracy. So, Anna and Rebecca, I did look at the website last night, and I was intrigued with some of the stories and about your dreams of what it is that you're trying to do. I know, among other things, than to throw in gender provocatively into our conversations alongside class. You've been imagining a new form of feminized community, a different way of doing things, and wait for it, in dialogue with Le Corbusier and Nye Bevan, female artists and the local women. I found that utterly intriguing and wanted to know more. So, Anna and Rebecca, talk us through some of the lived experiences of seeking to use an artistic imagination to reinvigorate a community and the idea of participative democracy. Anna, Rebecca.
Thank you, Linden. Is Anna here? Has she just dropped off the call? Oh no.
We're going to have to extemporize if necessary, and I'm sure you've got so much you could talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm also a Pound House owner and an artist. Both of us are artists, and I think that's very important. And we just really appreciate lots of the references that have been shared as part of the introduction to this work, actually. I've been living in Stoke now for 10 years. My mum's from Stoke, and Anna's been living in Stoke for a very long time and has been teaching at the uni for a large part of that time as well, which really feeds into the work that we're doing in the neighbourhood. I guess at this point we wanted to sort of share a presentation, so I'll continue talking for a little while. We've got a couple of links that, in the worst case sort of scenario, we can share those links with you, and we can just sort of talk today if that's easier. But yeah, so the Portland Inn project we began in 2016. Thank you, Linden, for that really helpful kind of context with which the sort of work has grown out from. The Pathfinder scheme meant that there are a number of derelict properties in the neighbourhood. The neighbourhood is right in the centre of Hanley, which is the city centre here in Stoke-on-Trent. We're a residential neighbourhood with about 500 homes. Anna, please, there you are. You okay? Oh no.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. I was just, yeah, you sort of you okay to sort of come back in the room? And I was just giving a bit of kind of context just off the back of Linden's introduction to how the Portland Inn project came about. If we're concerned about sharing the presentation, I could try to do so now from my laptop, or you're going to do that. Okay, great. So just whilst Anna's doing that, as I said, off the back of the Pathfinder scheme, which didn't continue in our neighbourhood, and actually at the time saw a proposal of demolishing the whole of the neighbourhood, actually left a number of properties abandoned and boarded up in the neighbourhood. Good few years later, the Pound Housing Scheme was introduced, and that saw the renovation of, I think it was 30 homes in that first round, wasn't it, Anna, that you were part of?
Yeah.
And Anna, you then through that scheme, regeneration scheme, moved into the neighbourhood in 2013 or 14.
Yeah, so we first applied for the scheme in 2013, and then we moved in 2014 as a family. Yeah.
Yeah. And in 2000, Anna was doing a project called Community Maker. I don't think that that's part of this presentation, but if you want to talk about that before I came to the neighbourhood, just very briefly, so that that's how people can know how we came to sort of live in Portland Street.
Yeah, so the sort of focus of the presentation today will be talking about well, really about the work that we do with our neighbours. But I suppose it is interesting to know that the two of us both came through the regeneration scheme. And initially, my project, Community Maker, was very much focused around creating a community ceramic to celebrate the resilience of the neighbourhood who'd been through a very traumatic failed regeneration program. And Community Maker was a street level project to create food sharing opportunities with neighbours and generate lots of imagery to then go onto a community ceramic, which we would aim to do within a couple of years. But within the first couple of weeks, the focus of the project changed and shifted really quickly, because neighbours, although they were really interested in learning new skills in ceramics production, were really vocal about wanting us to work together to try to secure a more permanent space. Because although there had been regeneration of housing, the pub, the shop and the community centre in the neighbourhood were all boarded up. And so really our projects from the very start, back in sort of 2014, 2015, everything would happen out in the open on the green space, from a series of temporary structures. We would create a sort of street level workshop or learning space and programme from those temporary spaces. So yeah, from the start, community members were really vocal about us needing to work together to secure a building. And so really since the beginning, the focus was on taking over an abandoned pub building and aiming to work together to transform that. And so our sort of learning processes, although they've all kind of looked at the Portland Inn pub building, have been sort of opportunities to learn together as a community, and sort of soft outcomes of that have been community cohesion, community organising and decision making, and sort of working together has brought the community much closer together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also in addition to that, just the importance of self-representation in all of these processes, where there is the opportunity for collective decision making. There's an opportunity to represent our individual needs and sort of speak up. And I think your mention of Dr. Stuart Hall is super relevant here. We're in a neighbourhood where lots of neighbours have felt marginalised and misrepresented in media, and also marginalised in decision making that affects our lives. So we really recognise that, and the sort of opportunities that creating space to represent ourselves can then kind of lead to the development of a building, which we're going to sort of share a little bit more about today. So our building and creative programme are designed to meet the creative and cultural needs of, as I've said, over 500 households in the neighbourhood, which make up the Portland Street neighbourhood. So it's a traditionally working class but increasingly culturally diverse neighbourhood within the sort of top 10% of most deprived in the UK. And that was both in the sort of indices of deprivation in 2019 and in the most recent indices released this year as well. So this obviously creates additional barriers to work and quality of life for the people that live here. So the neighbourhood is known externally for the Pathfinder scheme, which we've already talked about, so I won't go into that. Yeah, this is through the Pound Housing Scheme, how Anna and I came to live in the neighbourhood. And yeah, and also the project that sort of brought me to Stoke-on-Trent was a touring project called the Oasis Social Club, which celebrated social clubs, working men's clubs and pubs, and really how people can come together in spite of often problematic regeneration processes that don't always seek to represent the people that live and work in the places that they are regenerating. So yeah.
So I included this slide because this is from very early on in our work in the project, and right from the start, we were really we had a real emphasis on street level learning, and literally kind of creating a factory line on the street together at times. So this was an early workshop where we used molds from the Spode factory, which we brought down to the street. And then neighbours who would be passing would just come along and help us make a set of plates, which we would then add imagery that we had created in other workshops onto. And I think it's just really interesting to think about the context of the neighbourhood, where educational attainment is traditionally quite low and unemployment figures are high. And yet we find that neighbours will come and have a hand in and want to share the learning of skills, but also share skills that they have with other neighbours. And so our sort of informal educational programs are really interesting to our neighbourhood, and also are informed by people in the neighbourhood. So people tell us the skills they want to learn, and then we will program around that. And that's always been the case. And then I think it's just useful to kind of talk about very briefly the sort of process to try and get the pub. So we've been trying to advocate since 2016 for first of all, the asset transfer of the pub building, which the City Council agreed to in 2018. And so in 2018, we built this structure on the street with our neighbours, testing co-building processes. We built a temporary space with Baxendale architects, and in that summer we ran a 4-week programme which included setting up an architecture school on the street in order to redesign the pub building with neighbours. And so the pub building development, which we're working on and almost finished with at the moment, has been a community endeavour and an opportunity for community to redesign our futures.
Yeah.
Rebecca, can I you there?
Yeah. And I guess I also sort of wanted to talk about just briefly quite an important reference for us over the years, particularly when we're doing a summer programme that involves learning all of these different skills, also inviting lots of kind of creative professionals, but and designers, architects to sort of share their skills with neighbours, just the same as neighbours are sharing their skills with those creatives too. And Cedric Price's Potteries Think Belt has been quite a big inspiration in the past, and actually for a number of years now, our summer programme is called the Portland Think Belt, sort of in recognition of, just as Anna said, that kind of production line that is kind of created by that street level learning that we offer, but also that kind of exchanging of skills and knowledge. And it's obviously sort of geographically super relevant because the Potteries Think Belt that was proposed by Cedric Price was actually proposed around the kind of old train loop line, which is right next to our neighbourhood as well. So it's super relevant on loads of different levels. But here we are now in 2025. Actually, this photograph is from the start of the year. So we've come on quite a bit from this lovely photograph here. But this is the old pub building that we've been renovating. And it's taken a long time to raise the funds to sort of get this right. But the architectural plan was informed by, some of those initial kind of ideas and thoughts from neighbours as young as 5 during the architecture summer programme. and our neighbours have been involved in and contribute to our organisation since the start. So constantly shaping the programme, how we organise and the future of this building. And yeah, this is really a sort of real example of participatory governance for community-led change. And we're really excited to move into this building next year. So yeah, I guess what does this look like for us? This is just a few photographs of our community decision-making panel that we formed in 2018. And this was part of a kind of prioritising at the time to strengthen our organisation and really recognise that that involved foregrounding the sort of opinions and voice of our neighbours in decision making. So these are usually a bi-monthly meeting with food. We look at setting priorities, discussing urgencies and programming together. We vote on anything which needs a decision at that moment. And this isn't a traditional residents association. So something that we think is an asset in our neighbourhood is what's often described as a kind of criticism of our neighbourhood, which is how transient our neighbourhood is. Actually, we believe that to be a real asset, and we think that the community decision-making panel offers that opportunity for people to contribute ideas and thoughts during the time that they might be a short-term tenant in our neighbourhood as well. So we really need our kind of governance and our sort of decision-making to also represent that sort of fluidity of community as well, and that movement of community. Sometimes the residents association could be quite rigid, so it's quite important for us to be flexible there. And Anna, yeah, do you want to talk about?
Yeah. One of the things that we've been working on as a neighbourhood since about 2020 is a 100-year plan to really think about sort of long-term change, because we know that it has taken a long time for our community and our neighbourhood to get to the difficult and challenging position it has been in the last sort of 20 years. And so we know it's going to take a bit of time for us to get back out of that. And so the 100-year plan has been a really brilliant opportunity for us to start to think long term and to think about everyone's contribution. And I'm hoping that I can share a film which explains what the 100-year plan is and does. So let me know if you can hear this, please, everyone. Can you hear?
No, Anna.
Oh, okay. I did click on the thing that said to share the sound, and it worked earlier, but it isn't working now. So what we'll do is we will share the link.
I've got the link. I can put that in the comment in the chat.
Okay, and then maybe people can watch the film later. So the two films we were going to show, we're not going to be able to show, but we will share the links with you. But I'll just quickly tell you. So in the film, it details that our 100-year plan is based on thinking about Capability Brown's approach to landscape design, where he knew that the work that he was doing, he would never see the sort of full results. And, you know, our feeling is that we need to, as communities, as governments, we need to get back to that feeling that what we are contributing to is a future for our children, and not just thinking short term about sort of funding or political timeframes. And so with the 100-year plan, we know that our neighbours feel that they can contribute in a small way, perhaps looking after one plant within our garden landscape, or some neighbours want to know the whole landscape plan and want to be involved in all aspects. But what the 100-year plan offers us is an opportunity for everyone's contribution to be recognised and valued. And also that there is room for risk, or experimentation, but also for failure, because in a garden we know that we might plant something one year and we have to rethink it the following year because it hasn't necessarily worked out. And so we're kind of recognizing that risk, experimentation and learning from failure are all really important parts of neighbourhood planning and kind of finding a future together for our community. Yeah. So this is an image of how our future building will look, and we're only a couple of months away from sort of enacting this now, because you know, the building is almost finished. Our neighbours have been involved from the very start. The ground floor will be a kind of constantly evolving community space where learning, skills, play, fun, community together opportunities will be taking place. And then we have space on the the middle floor for the specialists and artists that come and visit us and share their skills to come regularly. And then the top floor is a key holder flat where we'll have somebody sort of living in the building and looking after the building long term. You'll notice there's also a roof garden, gardening and greening and thinking about the environment of the neighbourhood and making that a healthier place is also a really important part of what we do. And the community kitchen is because a lot of our programmes involve food sharing and food learning, because well, we know that food poverty is a big issue in our neighbourhood, and knowing how to cook healthy, cheap food is a real asset for us as a neighbourhood.
So we're focusing on the materials now needed for the retrofit of our building. And as Anna's sort of described and as illustrated in that last image, we're really making the most of this building. We sort of describe every nook and cranny as an opportunity for an artistic project, but also to develop a skill to perhaps make well, we've made ridge tiles so far. We've made tiles downstairs for the bathroom using clay from the belly of the building. There's been an upholstery project this year where members of that group have learnt skills in reupholstering furniture so that we can use those skills in the building as well for the furniture there. And yes, there's a whole sort of process of decision making now connected to the building and all the creative possibilities there. Yeah, that's the tiles project there. So and that's been led by ceramic artist and also our creative producer, soon to be our studio manager, Alice Thatcher, who's been working with us pretty much this whole time, hasn't she, Anna? But yeah, the last one was our neighbourhood workshop, and this is really important because this is really sort of marking the sort of the street level programme and what we can kind of learn by sharing skills with all the different sort of people that we're working with through the building, through our programme, but also all the skills that our neighbours have to offer as well. But in kind of developing the building, we've really recognised the importance of a healthy building and the impact that that has on our own health and our lives and our happiness, and that everybody has a right to kind of live in a healthy building. And how do we work towards that? How can we kind of develop skills as part of the neighbourhood workshop to perhaps adapt our own homes, or at least hold to account our landlords who might not be looking after our properties as well?
Yeah, so the neighbourhood workshop has been this really important part of the programme while the building has been going on, because as we've told you, from the very start, the community has been very involved in the development of the building in terms of its design and everything we want it to do. But when you get a contractor on site, it becomes a building site, and so you can't have everyone in all of the time. So the neighbourhood workshop has been an important programme running alongside the capital project in order to ensure that neighbours still feel completely part of and can learn from the construction process as it's going on. So it's been a kind of programme and a series of events and workshops and projects like the tile project to make sure that people are still kind of getting really hands-on with developing parts of the building with us. But it's also involved things like our contractor, Cornerstone Construction, leading things like the gutter doctor, where community members could come to the contractors and find out what kind of remedial works might be needed on our gutters, because we know that actually poor guttering is having a major impact across the neighbourhood in terms of people's damp and mould growing in their homes. Yeah, so alongside what we've been doing since the start, we've been thinking about the storytelling aspects of the work that we do and telling a different story about a neighbourhood where the only stories for the last sort of 30 or so years have been negative, about failed regeneration schemes, monkey dust epidemics, poor education and attainment. So in the past, all of the stories in the press about our neighbourhood had been really negative. And so a really important aspect of our work has been thinking about how we tell our own story in the neighbourhood. And so parts of our programme have always been dedicated to things like sort of filmmaking and storytelling through illustration. And we've also tried really hard to kind of encourage people to come and tell our story differently with us. And so thanks for mentioning the really brilliant Guardian piece that showcased our neighbourhood. But we were also really pleased to welcome Andy Oliver's BBC Two programme, Fabulous Feasts, who did a 1-hour programme all about our sort of food sharing in the neighbourhood. And this is a still from that show. So yeah, to kind of finish what we wanted to say, our whole project and programme from the start has been about how a community can change the story of the neighbourhood together and can create a building which becomes a beacon of hope in a place where hope was sort of few and far between for many years. And we're nearly finished with the retrofit of the pub building, which is starting to look just like this image here. And we're now thinking about how to use the building as a sort of emblem or a template for a wider neighbourhood renewal. And we're starting to look at whether or not to set up a community land trust so that we can start to tackle the housing locally, which is the next biggest issue for all of our neighbours. Rebecca, did you want to say anything to end there?
I think that's it. Looking forward to discussion.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. And there's so much to kind of whet the appetite or kind of touches us all maybe in different ways. I mean, the connections with things that are important to my own mental health, things like gardening and so on. The resonance of the 100-year plan set against the short-termism which has so bedeviled the area, that getting into the soil, the clay. I was going to bring a pigeon from our garden because I know that you've really worked with the idea of clay and the history and somehow reinvigorating a dimension of the local identity through the Portland pigeon. So there's so much richness here. Can I just ask you about one thing that did intrigue me? And you didn't really mention it, but I did. I just like to know a bit more about it. You call it the séance. And you're having an imaginary dialogue with a rather interesting cast of characters, some of whom will be known by the group. Le Corbusier, of course, male, very Parisian. Nye Bevan, of course, who people would want to applaud very loudly in the context of this group, but also local women, and trying to imagine the local area in a more feminized way by challenging the way in which we construct even the meaning of material things. Could you say a little bit more about that, please?
I was wondering if you'd read that, because and that must sound really strange to people that we were involved in a séance, but it was a piece that was written a while ago. Was it commissioned by, what's his name from the KLF?
Yeah, so there was a touring project which came through Stoke where they had a kind of a post-apocalyptic shipping container that you could visit, and they asked us to share some kind of piece of writing for the launch. And at the time, we were really thinking a lot about community-led design and about what feels often like sort of big regeneration projects which kind of ignore how people live and what would make people's lives better. And so we had started to look into different architects and their approaches, and sort of finding through history some really radical and brilliant ways of approaching, including Cedric Price, who Rebecca mentioned earlier, approaching design, community or building or neighbourhood design. And we were thinking about what if what if the architects actually came and sort of looked at how people live? And often the work that we do, we will find ways of sort of theorizing around some of the tricky challenges that we're experiencing in the work on the street. We quite often find sort of opportunities to exhibit or to write something which helps us to kind of work through the questions or thoughts that we're pondering over. And so the opportunity to write that piece was great because it gave us that chance to kind of think about what if we could gather together a series of the really interesting architects from history to then look at, you know, how our neighbours live and how they could kind of contribute to a different approach to community design.
Yeah, Jane Jacobs was at the séance as well, right? And Anna and I love Death and Life of Great American Cities. And there are a few others and I think it's really important to us to hold space for in a neighborhood where there's such kind of very real challenges day to day, hold space for kind of, you know, the reality and the dream. And I think part of that séance was inspired by a women's dinner that we had in what we described to be the secret garden, just because it's a little plot of land with loads of weeds on it. And we sort of, we took it over one evening, and we have done a number of times since, but to just have a dinner with women from the neighborhood. And that was when we formed SMUT, which is Singles and Mothers Unite Together. And in that evening, which was sort of candle lit, and it felt quite dreamlike, didn't it, Anna? Some of the women were sort of talking about like their own kind of landscapes that they want to kind of look out onto. And, you know, we're in the middle of an estate, like having these sorts of dreams that, you know, it was seance like almost, because it's kind of manifesting, what can be possible. And I think that like that's what's always been quite helpful about, and also sort of depressing at times over the years when we were struggling to get funding for the building, but having that building in sight all the time. And so there's this sort of dream is also, there's a kind of, it's tangible that like we have this focus on the building, and we, you know, the dream that we're manifesting is possible. But I think it's also, you know, it's interesting kind of thinking about it as as a sort of feminist angle. I think ultimately we're thinking about accessible architecture for all. And, you know, maybe that is feminist, and that's great. But also ultimately, this is, you know, we need that building for people to get their buggies into and wheelchairs in, and, you know, for everybody to access every nook and cranny of that building. So how do we do that? Because we are also adamant that we wanted to adapt an existing building with steps all over the place, and that was also on a slope. But, you know, when we are nearly at the making the dream a reality. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask one or two questions that really come out of the opening to the seminar from Ian. But I'm also aware that the darkness of the surrounding world intrudes. And we had some email exchange about protests against asylum seekers nearby outside the Best Western Hotel. And I know that it's quite distressing and involves some of your participants. Could you say a little bit about that, and how you dealt with it, how you were able or not to process some of these very disturbed moments?
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for asking that question. And it's something that we're talking about a lot and have done for a long time, actually. When we're sort of offering up a space of safety and care, kindness, inclusion, and representation of all. You know, also there's, you know, where flags are also kind of going up, and there are these tensions posed by also, last year there was the sort of far right kind of riot really that got really violent locally. So very practically, a way that we responded, part of being sort of very small and also being neighbours means that we can reach out by knocking on doors and calling up neighbours and just checking in with, mothers that we know live on their own as well and see that they're okay. So it's a very sort of real check-in of safety. But then also this is where sort of those partnerships with local services and authorities and agencies are really important, because actually some of the biggest organisations in Stoke didn't have a strategy or plan in response to, far right violence. And they are also representing really diverse communities and safe spaces. So actually those conversations with those organisations have been really important, where we're all informing each other and supporting each other. I want to share with you also a link to an article that we shared with our board a good few months ago that then informed a discussion that we had at YMCA with delegates from all over the country, that was written by a really amazing woman called Amara Spence, who leads my group that's now changed. It's developed into Hood Futures, which is based in Birmingham. She's a brilliant artist, activist, researcher, writer. And Anna's put the article in the chat. Thank you, Anna. But this informed a sort of big discussion that we had with groups around, how do we create a safe space in a hostile environment? And yes, it's ongoing work. It's very challenging. It's very real. But I think part of what we're doing is a project which is a radical safeguarding project. We're training up left, right, and centre. There's obviously, we're sort of operating with care always and centering care, but also there's a lot of very practical skills you need to learn in sort of leading communities in safety and safeguarding. So radical safeguarding is a training that we did at the start of the year with a person called Kieran, and he led a really beautiful session around how do we centre care in safeguarding, which is often about prevention and also holds a whole host of kind of discrimination with it actually. Yeah, that's then informed a year-long commission that we'll be doing with Kieran to write a radical safeguarding policy with neighbours, with our team, so that we're all on board and we're all writing that together. And we're calling it a neighbourhood pact as well, because language around policy and sort of can still feel quite kind of like another system, and actually this is a way of opening up as something that is representing us all, and is written by us. So it's a much more sort of democratic, we hope, and creative way of approaching what ordinarily might be described as a policy. Sorry, Anna.
Did you want to add?
No, I think Rebecca's covered it. Thanks.
You've also got a context, partly historical, maybe contemporary too, of quite unstable local government. And you've got the continuation in one form or another of austerity. And these things are all impacting local folk, including people in the community. I'm just wondering how that is managed and dealt with. You've got a ray of hope, but you've got a lot of despair all around as well. Can you take us into some of that and how you manage it? Because in this one sense, you would look for support from things like a city council, but I would imagine that can be very problematic.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because we've often talked about the sort of the need for hope and joy within the work, when actually there are times when hope and joy are quite few and far between, and we have been accused in the past of being frivolous, or not in this work actually, but in a previous project, Rebecca had quite a lot of animosity from some activists actually who didn't agree with the idea of celebration in amongst what is often really challenging and critical work when you're dealing with injustice and, you know, really dire situations in people's lives. For us, hope and joy is a core part of what we need to do, because there is more challenge coming, and we need to be able to gather together and find hope in each other when a system outside of what we can do is stacked against us. It's so imperative that we don't just fall into despair, because we know that that's where inaction kind of takes over. And actually what we have found is that in coming together, the kind of strength and resource that we build does kind of see us through, and also creates opportunities for us to have those conversations with local government about resource and the need to kind of bring service support in, because, you know, we can't do all of the work that is needed in our neighbourhood. We absolutely have to have partnerships with the city council, with the antisocial behaviour team, the environment teams, the police, all of those relationships that we need to kind of hold and nurture are very important. But alongside that, our community programming and the kind of the skills development and the kind of making it possible, they're kind of two things that are happening side by side, and they need to happen. They both need to happen, but there also needs to be a separation between the two, so that we can dream together and imagine together, but we can also kind of advocate for and get the support of those services. And so we actually have separated the meetings where, you know, we have on 1 month, we have a services meeting where the services come together and neighbours can come in and feed in what actions need to be taken to deal with things like crime and environmental issues in the neighbourhood. But then we have, on the other month, we have our community decision-making panel. So they kind of happen in opposite months. And the community decision-making panel focuses on the community programme, the skills development, the building, and all of the kind of positive and hopeful things that we can do together as a community. And I think that kind of separation and the two things happening in tandem and both moving on each month has been really important. And we can see that incrementally we're making a difference in both spaces. And also trying to inform the city council's approach to other neighbourhoods. So part of our work has really focused on the sort of policy impact and advocacy around sort of changing the system, because otherwise we're just always operating underneath these and sort of reacting to systems that are oppressive or don't work for communities. So we're trying to also do the work to change the policy. So that can be quite a lot at times, but, you know, all of those things need to be happening in order for us to do what we do.
Just one final question, then we'll open it up. I'm going back to what Ian and Sharon were saying. There seems to be a perpetual tension between those providing resources and what they want, and a kind of more bottom-up, participatory, democratic sense. There's that dimension. The other dimension is that mention was made, I think, of the double shuffle and a kind of, it's a struggle partly, it's a search, it's an imagination to allow kind of more participative democratic forms, as it were, to begin to form. What are your own reflections on that struggle to build vibrantly and in a participatory way, but a kind of local democracy that is or isn't working in the context of a representative system of democracy, which is flailing, to put it mildly?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because our community decision-making panel, we've got very used to voting. And it's interesting that we know that lots of the neighbours who will come and vote on which cladding to have on our building wouldn't go and vote for a political party. And also this is happening with our sort of youth board, the kind of self-organizing, sort of determining and then decision making and sort of voting. That for us is really important, that work is happening with our youth board as well, and kind of they can often demonstrate to us a much more hopeful approach to the neighbourhood. But we think that kind of opportunity to sort of play out democracy with our really, some of them very young people, we hope will then sort of encourage people to be more involved. But yeah. I think, go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, just to add to what you're saying, I think it's also about sort of on a really, really small scale, creating culture of kind of where there's agency, there's accountability. So I think just this in this kind of decision making, if there's a vote on something, we are then really accountable to put that in action. And if it isn't, residents will ask what happened to that, and actually, I think then it's quite interesting because parents of the children are sort of saying that in the school context, the kids are then practicing accountability and holding people to account. And I think that that's really playing out, as Anna said, in our youth panel, where, recently our youth board sort of held to account in a sort of services situation in one of those meetings. You said you'd do this, but we've not seen that yet. So what will be the outcome? So I just think that I don't know if that kind of perhaps plays out in sort of whether or not then people might be more interested to sort of vote because they, on a really small scale, have then seen there can be a kind of an outcome that you want from voting on a neighbourhood scale. I don't yet know how that might play out in sort of local politics, but certainly there's more and more sort of space for kind of discussion and debate and voting that we're offering up. And that's been really interesting.
Yeah, and I think in the context of the failed regeneration scheme as well, where community members were kind of consulted to the point of ridiculous, but didn't see the change that was promised, we have to ensure that, as Rebecca is saying there, when we say we're going to do something, we absolutely do it. And often the vote doesn't go the way Rebecca and I would have chosen, maybe. But, we have to stick with that because it's what people want in the neighbourhood. And seeing how your choice can quite quickly be turned into an action has been really quite a key part of how we work.
Looking at the chat, there's a lot going on there. And Olga and John have made some, Olga talking about joy as a mode of resistance to horror and all the rest of it. Olga, John, to start to open this up, did you want to kind of develop those points a little bit? Olga, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just thinking of some of the writings coming out from Black feminist writers, including still people like Angela Davis and so on. This idea of joy is linked to self-care. And I think that some of that's Foucauldian stuff about self-care being a political act. And so the joy is linked to that thing about caring for yourself is actually very important in terms of being able to have the resilience to care for others. And that part of that care is actually finding small moments of joy in contexts where people expect you not to be joyful and expect you to be kind of beaten down and just accept that you are powerless. And it's actually a way of refusing that kind of construct and fighting back.
It begs a question for me as to how you two look after yourself and where joy is found in your own experience. John, you wanted to raise something about how this relates to the decline of civil society, and what's your reading of this project in that sort of context?
I'm not sure, Linden, whether I got a great deal more to say than what I've said in the little chat, but I'll try saying it anyway. I did some research a number of years ago, looking at what made or what enabled people to stay active in as kind of community adult educators over time through difficult situations. One of the things that really came out of that was that the people who had stayed active were had a kind of degree of resilience, which it's almost sort of psychological resilience, but it also went back to the kind of support networks that they had. Clearly one of the things that was problematical in some of those situations, we were looking across Europe, and one of the things we were looking at the shift in political parties and so on over time, amongst many other things. One of the things that really came out of that was that as people, the people's support networks had been in groups such as those, and when the ideology or the or whatever had dissipated, and the political organization or trade union or whatever had decayed, this affected their people's ability to be active, because clearly they didn't have the support networks that went with it. And I mean that was research done 20 plus years ago, but I'm thinking now about the current environment and the way in which this is a very autobiographical kind of thought, the way in which I respond to the and those and people I know, close friends and so on, respond to the generally awful situation that we see in the world around us, and both in this country and internationally. And a good deal of the response is to say, oh God, the news is so bloody awful that I'm just not going to listen to it. I'm not going to engage with it. I'm going to hide. And one feels guilt about that, but also a sort of sense of lack of agency, I suppose, or capacity. And I mean, clearly one needs these networks, and I'm struck by the way that the description of the Portland project suggests that this enables resources to be redeveloped or to be developed locally. Sounds very important.
Any responses, Rebecca, Anna? I mean, how do you keep? I mean, I know, wearing another hat, I mean, the issues of mental health and emotional distress are enormous in these places. You've got your own to look after. Have you got any thoughts about that and its management and how it relates to the project?
Thank you. Yes, we started last year a project with a really brilliant organisation who are neuroscientists, and a group of different sorts of scientists based in London, called Centric Lab. And we did some training with them, which was training in how to create a community health impact assessment. And we've continued that work this year, and we'll be sort of focusing more on that next year, to talk about with our neighbours we kind of have a core question, which is what stops you from sleeping at night? And this is a really good question because it talks about physical things, which are sort of environmental, in the neighbourhood, noise, air pollution and things like that, but also mental health. And we do have a focus around sort of thinking about the work that we can do together and how it supports better mental health. And we know from our neighbours, from some of the impact I wrote an impact case study about the project a couple of years ago, and we continue to kind of map and track our impacts, including on sort of mental health. And our neighbours tell us all the time, being involved in the project really supports and improves my mental health. And we know that for some neighbours, the kind of challenge of where we live and the systems we live within mean that people's mental health is really challenged, but that coming together and feeling like we can contribute and we can make a change and we can try to tackle some of what is making life harder does make it better, even if that's just in solidarity with each other.
Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to sort of respond to Olga, who mentioned Angela Davis, who Anna and I love, and lots of people that we work with in the team as well. And, you know, we really celebrate that work and that activism and the hope and joy that's needed in sort of activism, and hope and joy as a form of protest, you sort of mentioned. And I think that it is quite interesting thinking about, you know, sort of activism where some people believe there's a right or wrong way of protesting, and actually there being an element of control there. And I think, you know, as we've kind of touched on, when we talk about people's contribution to community and what people are able to sort of contribute in the smallest to the whatever way that they can do, that being really important in community. And just the same in protest, we will have different methods and ways of doing and different ways that we can contribute. And we really value that. And I think as artists as well, there's different sort of skills that we bring and that are very different to the skills of our neighbours as well. And it's about creating that space to represent all in that kind of protest for, you know, I guess this is, you know, we sometimes describe this work as being a kind of a campaign, yes, for sort of social and environmental justice, but also importantly, like that all children have a right to great quality education and great quality arts. And we start that by sort of trying to kind of deliver a great quality program on the streets that we live. I'll stop there, I think.
I can't resist bringing in Rebecca, who's also made a comment in the blog. I when I think of you, Rebecca, I think of the wonderful article you wrote on turning, which you'll need to translate for the foreigners amongst us, and the important ritual of turning. But you've also reminded us of the turning the plate to see where it was made, and the complex kind of emotional dynamics that unleashes in terms of some of the things that Ian was talking about, not least loss and annoyance and what the hell's happened to my community. And you've also quoted Angela Davis. Do you want to quickly come in, Rebecca?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Rebecca Leach. I was responding to Olga and Anna's point about Angela Davis, but also Bell Hooks, who has written beautifully on home place. And your project really resonates with me in that writing about the way in which Black women cultivate home place as a source of not only joy but resistance, and I found that very powerful. Yeah, just to kind of chime in about the pottery identity, and I've done a bit of research a long time ago now, but I'm based close by Stoke, and I'm a social scientist by background, sociological anthropologist, I suppose I'd call myself, and it struck me. I've done a lot of work on material culture, thinking about consumer cultures and the way in which objects kind of shape people's sense of identity, and how people resist the ways in which consumer objects are described for them and to them, and the sort of little games they play with themselves to kind of recreate that. And it kind of hit me in the face a few years ago that I've spent my life living in and around North Staffordshire, and I don't only just notice that everyone's obsessed with pottery. And reading and talking to some local artists and activists, beginning to recognise that relationship is quite an ambivalent one, and it's also generational. So the turning over point that Linden mentioned, it's a kind of habit that I've tried to describe as more of a ritual, because it has deep, significant meaning, in which locals turn over their pottery wherever they go. And I began to think, what was this process? Is it just, you know, a kind of habit? Is it just about curation and value in terms of, you know, the kind of collector's view? But actually, talking to people who do it and who have strong feelings about it, it became a bit more than that, and it became a story of kind of loss and hope and rage, actually. So a lot of what's going on when people turn over pottery is about deindustrialization and the kind of enacting that loss. And it's also a way in which, I mean, again, and for me as a Mancunian, you know, an incomer can become a Stokey as well. It becomes part of a kind of adopted identity to kind of retell that story. But it's, I mean, like, the paper I wrote was quite complicated and possibly overly complicated about the kind of psychoanalysis of it, really, the deeper way in which objects, and industrial objects in particular, kind of carry that loss with them. And I was trying to make that story. Anyway, it's not completely unrelated to the Port Linden project, but I think it's about that story of Stoke and the way we retell a story. And I don't want it to just be romanticized and say pottery is lovely, because it isn't. It, you know, it's dirty and dark, and it killed a lot of people. So it's about trying to capture that ambivalence people feel about deindustrial loss. Anyway, I'll stop. That's actually right to me.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's very helpful. I don't know whether you can put in the link to your article, and because it's a fascinating, very rich piece of writing. Rebecca and Anna, we're running out of time. There's so many things we could have asked. I'll leave it to you. Any quick responses to all the comments, and then we'll go back to Ian and Sharon, taking a break before we move to Wales.
No, just thanks so much, everyone, for, you know, the opportunity to share our work and talk through what we do, and yeah, really just great to sort of be with you, and really great comments and thoughts from you all as well. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great, and also just so rad that you're also mentioning amazing women like Bell Hooks and Angela Davis, you know, like it's we just really appreciate this space to kind of share the work, but also this kind of critical understanding and kind of feedback and comparison to like such rad, amazing people as well is really cool. So yeah.
I want to say thank you again. I know the area. I know family lived in those places. I know what terrible.
We're looking here on the.
Pardon? Terrible suffering there's been, and it's just a joy to hear something like this, a kind of a talking back to power in a very joyful and creative, life-enhancing and eclectic way. I really loved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Linden. Just very quickly as well, Anna's shared Amara's article, Amara Spence, that I mentioned, but I do think that is a really important sort of read in terms of acknowledging, that grief and trauma experienced in post-industrial neighbourhoods like ours, that there's a kind of a loss of identity as well, or a feeling of that. And so, again, just really making a case for kind of joy and hope in that space.
Definitely. And what Amara is saying there is, if we sort of fail to talk into that space, the only people who will be talking into that space are the fascists. So let's try and fill that space with that hope and joy, knowing and acknowledging the difficulty and the sort of trauma that is there.
Thank you. Thank you again. I do the love things, but I I forget how to use it, but there are one or two coming up. Claps anyway. It's a restrained group. We've got some love things, love hearts coming. Yeah, Sharon, back to you.
Thank you, Linden, and for that, all of those comments about love hearts and the applause, and just to share really all of the comments that you have made. And in particular, I'm struck by the richness of not only the contributions, which I found throughout fascinating, but the comments in the chat thread as well. And what we will do is share those afterwards. And thanks both for not just what you said, but those connections to those other materials, because I think that that's something that we seek to generate after the event. So not only have we got the recordings, but people in their own time can go to key references that I think Olga started us with, and then others have contributed to, and also that recent work, because I think that contemporary work you were mentioning is great. If everybody agrees, Sharon, I don't know what you think. I think perhaps a 5-minute pause, and then for you to pick up on and introduce Kerry. Does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah,
we'll do that then. So if we take a pause, and then everybody, we kind of reconvene in 5 minutes.
Yeah. So just to let everybody know, just stay on the stay on the call. You don't need to leave or anything. We'll just kind of come out for now and come back in.
Yeah, but thanks again to
thank you,
Becky. That was brilliant. Yeah, really, really good. Thanks ever so much.
I think we'll recommence, and just want to say a thank you from me for that fantastic presentation. By the way, I really enjoyed it, and as Joe Fulstone noticed, has written lots of comments about how inspiring and how much it gives hope, and it really does. So we're now going to move into the kind of next section, which connects with our event in September. And for those of you who weren't at the event in September, we talked particularly about the arts, space, education, and intergenerational learning, a whole range of different subjects. But in the context of Wales, and we had a number of brilliant presentations, including from my friend and colleague, Dr. Cilla Ross, who spoke about her time at Coleg Harlech, which was, as for those who don't know, a short-term and long-term residential institution, which was a source of second chance education for many individuals, and a source really of lifelong connection to the place and space itself, despite the fact that it's been left to effectively crumble to the ground, which is, in my view, a deep tragedy. We heard from my brother at the last event as well, Jeremy Clancy, who shared his film, which I found it profoundly hopeful, because it's called The Coal Beneath Our Feet, the Wind Above Our Heads. And it was very much about how people learn through local history, through archival memory, through the memory of the people in their own community, and learn to reconnect to their community, even as very young people who had felt previous to the film and to the connection with older people in the community who'd been activists, that they had no real connection to that area and that place. And it was a profound learning experience. I know from speaking to my brother at the event, for him as a filmmaker, as well as for the people involved in the film. So we're going to be shifting our focus now to Wales. And I'm in particular really excited to introduce Kerry Thompson, who's going to be talking to us about his experience as curator at the Big Pit in Wales, but also, I think more than that, about his connection through his own life journey and experiences. He was part of the NCB at Coombe Colliery, if I've pronounced that correctly, and was himself at Coleg Harlech from 1986 to 1988. And then went on to the University of Wales. And I'm really intrigued by this, because he went on to study Welsh history, Welsh studies, which he described really as a form of really Welsh literature, which I think is quite profound. Has been involved since in the Council of Museums in Wales, and has been curator of the Big Pit since 1999. And I know that we just had a brief chat that Kerry's committed, as we all are, to thinking about kind of memory, archives and research, but in the context of relationships without hierarchy and how we build from community level in response to the previous presentation. Thank you, Kerry. I'll hand over to you. I know you want to talk for 10 minutes or so.
Right, good morning all. Hope you're well. The sun is out in Nagaro. Anyway, it's going to talk basically because I was asked to talk basically about experience in Coleg Arlech, and as I said earlier, the only photographs I had was people drinking. So I didn't think that would make much of a presentation here. Otherwise, it was a sort of a history of the South Wales coalfield, and I didn't think that was sort of either way. But anyway, if I give a bit of a thing of my background, which I don't know if it's typical, but it's probably not far off. My cousin who did family history has taken our family back to 8 generations of coal miners, yeah, including a mine manager, which is a bit of a shame, but there you are. So we've been embedded in the coalfields for, well, the best part of the coal industry. Coal industry lasts probably about 150 years in South Wales, yeah, as a major employer. Anyway, so I was born into that lot in the Rhondda. My formal schooling, when they say second chance, well, I messed up the first chance. So I can't say that I was deprived or anything. I had every chance in the world. I went to a grammar school, and grammar schools don't exist anymore, but they were, you know what I mean? The old grammar school system was really something. But I messed that one up. I managed to get 3 O-levels. I'm not sure how. But I couldn't go on any further because the headmaster made it plain that there was a shovel waiting for me down Cwm Colliery, right? And he was very eager for me to use it rather than cluttering up his classrooms. So I went up to the colliery. The interview in the colliery, of course, was, where did your father work? Which is about it. When you think of the things we go through today with interviews, you know. So my father was a fitter in Lewis Merthyr for quite a while. So anyway, I got in, didn't I? I stayed in Cwm Colliery from about October 1970, and I think we got it wrong with the dates. I got it wrong with the date. But the colliery itself shut down in 1987. So we're looking from that sort of period. Although I had stopped being taught officially, working underground was actually a very good educational opportunity. You know what I mean? It wasn't, you weren't just shoveling all day. There was so much you learnt about geology, working with people, machinery, you know, all sorts of things. It was a really good practical education. And working with some of the men down there, they weren't just thinking about rugby and drinking, you know what I mean? We had one chap, he was an expert in Egyptology, so he was talking about pharaohs half the day. And then we had other ones then who knew about the 100 Years' War and whatever. We had poets working down there, artists working down there, actors working down there. You know, it was very much of a mixture of people. I remember when I was in Arlech, we used to go to see the plays, because in Coleg Arlech, it was a local theatre anyway, but they used to put on plays, including ones by an organisation called Moving Being, which did plays on the Mabinogion and all this type of thing. But they also did ones on the Merthyr Rising. And one of the students who wasn't from South Wales thought we shouldn't be doing things like that. It wasn't what our class should be interested in. You know what I mean? So I found that a very strange thing to do indeed. You know what I mean? But anyway, I'd also another practical experience, and it gave you a good basis in dealing with people and debating with people. I was the NUM coalface representative, because every coalfaces, they were basically run by the men themselves, which probably says to most people. You had a deputy, an official who looked after safety on that pit, but he didn't tell you what to do. And you did have an overman who was looking after the coal that was going out, but basically we ran ourselves, you know. And I was the NUM coalface rep, and I always like to think of it as being like a Red Army commissar, because that's, you know what I mean, we were the ones that did the political education there, if you know. Yeah. Also, I was, as I was very red and very active, when I used to go to the meetings on Saturday morning, I was always really disappointed that we weren't planning to attack the Welsh office steps or Houses of Parliament, and we just used to do dust cases and anyway, stuff like that. So that was always, I just wanted to join the workers' army and get going, but it didn't really happen really anyway, not until the strikes anyway. I took part in three major strikes, three national strikes, 72, 74, and 84, 85, but also a couple more, and a Welsh-based one, which was to gain more money for people working above ground, the surface man strike in 1970. And that actually, I was in on that about 3 months after starting work. So you can see what it was like working for the coal board. Anyway, one thing that did go for me, I always liked reading, especially history. And in a way, I always wanted to do further education. I was an avid reader, avid visitor to the library from the time I was old enough to have a ticket, I think. So I had all that. So one of the things I covered with that, I decided to learn Welsh. Now, my grandmother used to speak Welsh to me, and I used to answer in English. But I never really, spoke much myself. But I thought, right, my daughter was going to Welsh school at the time, which is a big movement in Wales at the moment. And you had the chance then to go in the evening, because they liked the parents to actually know a bit of Welsh as well, to bring them on. Innit? So I started doing that. And the classes were under the WEA. We mentioned those before, the Welsh Education Association. I think we mentioned it before. The Welsh, the Workman's Education, what do you call it? Anyway, they were held in Club of Bont in Ponty, which was basically a drinking club in the basis, but they did put classrooms out. So you could have a few pints and then learn a bit of Siarad Cymraeg, and then, and play pool as well. I learned to play pool in Welsh, which is a good way to do things. But the convener, the local representative for the WEA was Wayne David. Now, he became an MP in later life. But he turned up one day, and I was having a pint before we started in the bar. And everybody in Wales used to, at that time, was saying, "Are you working then?" That was the first thing. "Have you got a job? Are you doing anything?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, have you thought of further education?" So I said, "Yes." And I wanted to do the Open University or something. I always thought, I fancied just doing that, because I'd wasted my time in school. So I thought there was a chance to formalise it all. And I was older, you know what I mean? I'd done all the drinking and dancing and rugby playing things. And I thought it'd be nice to actually do formal education. That didn't happen. But Wayne David then sent me a brochure to Coleg Arlich and an application form, which I took home and put in the drawer. And then about a month or two later, when things were looking a bit rough to get a job, I had a few black market jobs, but nothing formal. And it was telling at the time, because myself and my friend George Winogorski, who was a Polish miner, used to walk around the factories, knocking on the door, any jobs going, builder sites, any jobs going, nothing going. And my wife actually phoned up a couple of factories, and one of them said, "Oh, yes, love, you can start today." She said, "Well, it's not for me." She said, "It's for my husband." "No, we don't want men." So apparently women are easy to work with. They were probably cheaper in those days anyway. But I thought that was quite telling, because I think at that time, there was more women in occupation in Wales than there was men, but I may be wrong. So anyway, that was going down. So we decided then to try for Coleg Arlich. The interview basically was a proper, let's find out about your interview. You know what I mean? Asking about your background and this, that, and the other. We didn't have a point system or anything else. It's sort of, if they thought you could do it, you'd get in. So we managed to get in. Oh, by the way, we went up for the interview, and I took my daughter up with us, who was 4, I think, at the time, or 5, and my wife, obviously. So when we were being taken down around the library in Coleg Arlich, which is magnificent, as a building and as a collection, she was very quiet in the corner while I was talking to the librarian. And when we came back, I said, "What have you been doing?" And she said, "Oh, I've been arranging the books." So she arranged all the books on the shelves in colour order. So I thought that was quite good. She ended up with an MA in the end, but so I must have kicked her off. Let's have a look. What are we? Right. Right, so we was in Coleg. Coleg was a 2-year course. And I said I'd love to add photographs showing what lovely buildings they was. They were sort of mock medieval buildings with a big commie block stuck in the middle of them. So you've probably seen the photographs of it all, haven't you? And I don't know if any of you have seen the S4C program they did on Coleg, but it's heartbreaking. It's just Lloyd, the theatre is dripping, the lectures, anyway, it's very, very sad up there. It was pretty good up there. One thing that they did do, which they didn't really do in university afterwards, was to teach us how to précis, how to debate, and they tell you, and the first week or two, we didn't do our own, the subjects we'd chosen. We had to do somebody else's subjects for the first 2 weeks. So we went to lectures on sociology and psychology, which put me off for life. But, so we had to look at things from a different way. Eventually, I chose Welsh history, and that was called Welsh Studies as well as what I did in university. But the Welsh Studies in Coleg was a wonderful course. It covered, well, the first question they ask you is, how many sheep are there in Wales? Anybody know? There's 9 million sheep in Wales, right? But there's only 3 million people. Now, that tells you everything you need to know about Wales, doesn't it? You know what I mean? It's difficult geography, and all that. And also, we were taught the invasion routes about the north and the south, which means where the population is. So it was all stuff like that. So we did commerce and just about everything, arts, film studies. It's great. We could watch the Cornish Green on a Wednesday afternoon for a couple of hours, some of Richard Burton's earlier stuff. It was a really excellent course, and the lecturers up there were more, I'm not saying down to earth than they are in university, but they most of them had come from a working background themselves, so they understood what you were going through, at the time. They were also quite bloody horrible, because if you didn't get your essay in on a Wednesday, even though it had to be in on a Thursday, they used to come around looking for you and say, "Where's your essay?" So it was quite disciplined in that sort of way. And the other thing you say that, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm fed up." "Oh, where would you rather be, here or up to your neck in water, boring holes in a bloody coalface?" So obviously it was better to be in Coleg, wasn't it? So it was something really that, I don't know, it was probably the best 2 years of my life. The worst bits about it was I had to leave my wife not completely for 2 years, but for so many months at a time, and my young daughter. So we missed out on that part of it all, you know what I mean? They used to come up to stay with us and things like that, but mostly I become a single man again with all that sort of thing. But anyway, there was a lot of it. And the other thing is that at that time, there was more of an interest in sort of working class Welsh history. I don't know if you've heard of Gwynalf Williams. We've heard about the other Williams, but Gwynalf Williams was an historian. He was originally a medievalist from York University, and then did books on the Merthyr Rising and the legend of Madoc. Did you know America was discovered by a Welshman? Anyway. So the legend of Madoc and all this type of thing. And he actually brought it down to a proper level. My father used to say, listening to Gwynalf Williams' programs was like talking to the local roadman who knew a bit, who was, he could bring it home to people. He also taught me really that as a museum curator, I am the people's rememberer. I think that's the title he had. We are there to help people. Because we always get, the community has to tell us this and tell us that. But in a way, we are the ones who gather this information together and then pass it on to everybody else or keep it alive. I always think, and they always say, you should only do things if the community is interested. But there was a doctor called Dr. Henry Norton Davies in the middle to late 19th century. He took part in 11 different disasters. He'd basically founded the cottage hospital in Porth in the Rhondda. And when he died, the streets from Porth up to Llwyn-y-Pier, which is about 6 or 7 miles, was packed with people. Now, you stand in Porth today and say, Henry Norton Davies, and they look at you blank. So in a way, that's our duty to keep that going, if you know what I mean, as well. We can't just rely on other things. We are the people's remembrances. So I got that out of there as well. Also, of course, we did the race riots in Cardiff in 1919, which people had sort of forgotten about. Penryn slate dispute, all this, the exciting bits. I did hear in the museum that somebody said we shouldn't really be doing industry because children haven't got any affinity with it. But when you look at the history of Welsh industry, it's a Netflix series, right? It's really powerful. There's disasters, there's wars going on, there's all sorts of things. It's absolutely fascinating, but to me anyway, absolutely fascinating story. It's an adventure in a way. It's not just about machines going up and down coal faces or steam engines and whatever. So, of course, we learned that as well, basically, from there. And actually, my long study, because the nearest I got to writing a PhD was a long study in Coleg Arlech. And you had to choose a topic and then write whatever it was on it, 12,000 words or whatever, with the illustrations or whatever. And I chose the mechanisation of coal faces in Wales. Now, the problem with that was nobody in Coleg Arlech could mark this, could they? So they had to put it out to, I think it was somebody in the NCB, I think, actually marked it. But even in that time, I had in my mind that I was going to work in a museum and it was going to be an industrial museum. So my long study was actually the basis of some of the displays up in Big Pit today, Like I said, it's known as a second chance college, but in a way, it was probably my first chance I took college, And we're going back to some of the earlier comments that there was a sort of a block. By 1987, the old Wales had basically died overnight, Things changed. I did notice when I was coming back and forth from Harlech that pubs had closed, or there was nobody in the pubs, there was nobody in the clubs, there was nobody really walking down the street. When Friday night used to be like Dodge City, in America. Now it's dead, It's like the community sort of died overnight. It's really, really horrible. Thought, a couple of months ago, I was up in Gilfach Goch, where I used to spend a lot of time when I was a teenager, and there's nothing happening there. There's no pubs open, there's no shops open. The only movement was the Tesco van delivering, and Gilfach Goch was the basis of how green was my valley. So you can imagine what it's like. Right? So that's my basic parts. And I got an unbounded love for Coleg Arlech. And funny enough, I don't really see anybody else from there, but I know there are a few that's still active in the various parts, including one of the archivists in West Glamorgan Archives. But there you are. So that's my basic part. So open to questions.
Thanks, Kerry. That was fantastic and so rich as well and so real. And I just wanted to pick your brains about a couple of points, really, I think. I was really struck by your comment that you learned so much down the pit and your description of the different kind of skills and interests of the guys down the pit. Someone interested in Egyptology, these kinds of people immersed in history. And I think that's an element of almost the self-organisation that I've picked up from my own dad's experience down Glatwell Colliery in Derbyshire, and talking to him as well as my granddad, who was a South Wales miner, as I think you know. And I think that was that whole idea of a community underground, not just talking about rugby and women or whatever else they might have been talking about, but sharing genuine interests in the kind of intellectual world that people develop in. I just wondered if you could maybe say a bit more about that, because that must have influenced your interest in Coleg Harlech as well.
Well, I remember the main road was underground, they're called head-ins, and at the end of the head-in there's a massive stone face where they have to bore for explosives and whatever. Now, I can't think of his name now, but one of the old chaps doing these holes used to shout down chest problems that we had to answer for him, So, so it was incredible sometimes. And I wonder if it was really because there wasn't a lot of chance in the 40s and 50s for people to go on. So people who today would have probably been computer programmers or office people or different jobs basically went underground, But in their heads, they still wanted this stuff. They still needed this stuff, you know what I mean? And like I said, I didn't find anybody in Wales who had the idea that plays weren't for us. Beethoven wasn't for the likes of us, Didn't really find that at all. And in fact, you could have somebody who could tell you everything of bloody Beethoven and Mozart and whatever.
Yeah.
Half the boys was called Haydn after the composers. That's a Welsh, Welsh one.
Yeah.
So that came out. And also when I was coming home from Coleg Arlich, I was on the bus going through Beather, and one of the old colliers was on the bus. He said, "Oh, what are you doing now then?" Well, he didn't say, "Are you working?" But he just, "What are you doing now then?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in college." And he said, "That's good." He said, "Show those bastards we're not stupid."
Yeah.
So there was that feeling, don't keep us down. We had pride. And I think South Wales miners and West miners, and miners in particular, have got the feeling they're the most important people in the world.
Mm.
We could bring down governments. We could stop the world if we wanted to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, we didn't sort of see national boundaries between French miners, German miners, Russian miners, or anybody else. We were, I had more in common with a Ukrainian miner in the Donbass than I would have had with a stock exchange worker up in London.
Yeah.
So there was that sort of working class sort of community. I don't like using the word class that much because, anyway, but there is that sort of comradeship between you. If you met a Yorkshire miner when you was on holidays up in Blackpool or something, immediately you had something in common. You could talk about, the place used to be full of coal dust after about 10 minutes. So there was that came out of it. They weren't downtrodden. They weren't... A lot of people think, "Oh, do you really want people to work in the ground in those dirty conditions and the health?" But actually, it was something that made people around here. It made Wales different. It made Wales stronger. And it showed in the politics and the struggles we had there. And my grandfather had been a participant in the Tonopandi riots in 1910. And he was actually 11 years old, throwing stones at police. So it's, brought in there. Then you went through 1926 and the 1930s disputes and all this type of thing and everything else. So I think it was a marvellous education just to be born in, in the valleys, basically.
Yeah. I was really struck by what you said, Kerry, about willful remembering, because it's one of the phrases I know that Ian's used, which I really like. And you describe yourself as the people's rememberer, which I thought was fantastic. So do you feel you're playing that role at Big Pit as well?
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to go into all the projects we've done. They haven't been as formal as the projects we've described this morning, obviously. But I did one. I wanted to do black miners, right? Because everybody was on about black miners, but there was very few in South Wales. We did work. They had about 4 boys, like West Indian, with us. A couple of Hindus were working with us, but they just basically blended into the community anyway. And if somebody come and said, "Have you got any black workers?" we'd have asked one of the twins, who both mixed race, "Hey, have we got any black people working here?" And of course, they were from Slanchester. The mothers were from, So they sort of just blended in. So what I thought was a good one was Eastern Europeans who came in. And later on, of course, Poles were looked down on and they'd taken our jobs in the south and the other. But I worked alongside Paul. I said earlier on, my best friend was George Winogorski, whose father had been in a labour camp in Poland, made to sleep with the pigs overnight and kept escaping. He was about 17, I think. And eventually did escape, came down through the Pas de Calais, came across the channel and ended up in South Wales, and then ended up in a tank in Germany with the Polish First Armoured Division, So I was interested in that type of thing. And also a lot of the older men underground, they were the former Yugoslavia, Yugoslavians, Slovenia, people like that. And I used to find their stories fascinating because you had these old, really lovely blokes who'd look after you, and they used to tell stories. These were white Yugoslavians, basically Chetniks, royalists, and they had described one day how they crept up on a lot of Tito's boys and slit everybody's throat. They'd seen awful things. I interviewed a bloke who'd been on the Peenemünde rocket site as a slave labourer and escaped from there. When the RAF bombed it, he ran and managed to get across.
Amazing.
It's in people's minds. You go to a house in Bedwar somewhere, and there's a little inoffensive looking bloke in the corner with always had Yorkshire Terriers, right? I had a Yorkshire Terrier as well. That's a miner's dog. And their wife there would be cutting string beans for you out of the allotment and bringing them in for you to take home in the Echo and things like that. And the stories, honestly, yeah, you can't believe it. They are, again, Netflix series on their own. The chap I was saying in bed was, when I went in, he didn't have any ears. His ears had gone. So being polite, you don't say, what's wrong with your ears then? But, you know. Anyway, it turns out that he'd been in the Bedwas explosion in 1956, about 10 years probably after he came up, became a miner. And he'd managed to he had big thick gloves on, so he put his hands over his face. But the blast had gone past his hands and burnt both ears off and burnt all his stomach. So he was in Chepstow Burns Hospital for quite a while and all that. And like I said, you saw him in Tesco and you think, oh, another old nuisance hanging around, but these people had seen a hell of a lot more than I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think my wife also works for the NHS, and for about a month she was seconded down to the Old People's Hospital in Pontypridd, Dewi Sant Hospital, and she used to love talking to the people in there, and a lot of the staff, unfortunately, used to treat them as children, and this, that, and the other. But she said you sat and talked to them, and they were ex-bank managers. Some of them were nursing sisters. They all had this story behind them, and they'd all been part of the whole thing. They'd now become a problem, hadn't they?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and they were looked down on, and if they wet themselves, it would be all you dirty so and so and this that. And these people had made the world basically.
Yeah.
So that needs to be remembered, and it needs to be carried on to my grandchildren, and
That really struck me as well, because I don't know if you watched my brother's film. I know I sent you the link, Kerry, but the thing that really struck me was the young people in it from a local school who were 16 or thereabouts. Their learning came from talking to two older activists who, again, on the face of it, you wouldn't have known, for example, that the woman involved had been at Greenham Common.
Yeah.
And the guy involved had been heavily involved in the Tower Colliery situation and the kind of community ownership that took place. Yeah. And I think they had this huge revelation, which struck me as being this incredibly powerful example of, for want of a better expression, intergenerational learning from people in the community. And this was a kind of revelation.
Well, I learned on my grandparents. Your parents don't talk to you in that way, do they? But your grandparents do. And I learned a lot then from the four of them, really. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers had played for Bristol Rovers for a while. So again, and he'd also taken part in Powder Hall running, which was professional road running, which involved a lot of betting and a lot of thuggery. But, you learned all that from the valleys, because a lot of people think the valleys are a problem. Like old people, it's a problem. There's all drug taking and they steal cars, don't they, up there?
It's
the only problem was in the 1900s, the early 1900s, was how big the place was going to grow and how powerful it was going to be and how many people were going to be in there. That was seen as the problem. And it annoys me when, say, people from Cardiff in particular think, oh, the valleys, don't want to go up there,
So how important do you think history is to all this, Kerry? I mean, I can tell that we were of a like mind on this, because to me, knowing the history doesn't mean being nostalgic or indeed just confining history to the past, as we've said many times in our sessions. It's very much about how we see ourselves now, our sense of agency and
what's the old thing? If you don't know where you come from, how do you know where you're going?
Yeah.
And it is all part of it. And I always found it fascinating, talking to my grandmother, and she was describing the Cummer Colliery explosion in 1856 and how wounded people were brought up at waist height and dead people were brought up at shoulder height. Simple things like that. People who had seen horrors, basically. And they just had carried on their life later on. And history is I've loved history since I could read, if you know what I mean. And I still do now, anything,
And that was your subject, really, and
it was really. That's the only reason I had an O level, I think. I didn't have to revise. I just wrote a lot of gibberish down.
But that seems to have been a thread, and I love what you said as well about Colin Carlick. This is something I'm getting increasingly obsessed with, that you did other people's subjects. You didn't just do Welsh literature or Welsh
But
studies.
only for a certain amount of time. When you
Yeah,
start,
but
just
it was
so
so
you could
broad, though.
board.
Yeah.
I was interested in the Welsh back, which is something we do here, which is more of a widespread learning.
Is
I'm
it
not a
baccalaureate?
learning officer, so we don't tend to do things like that. But I did lecture to the Welsh back pupils.
Yeah.
And I remember one lot, and it was Tonopandi Community College, because I tended to do the over 11s. So I did the students and the older learners, you know what I mean? And Tonopandi Community College, I said, Tonopandi, I said, what's it like up there? And they said, it's dead. And I said, well, you go back to 1910, and the army was in there, the Metropolitan Police was in there, Winston Churchill was interested in the thing, you know. This is part of your history. It might look a bit naff now, but this is where it's come from, you know.
Mm.
It's to bring that sort of pride in who I am and what we could be, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but that power in knowing local history is so vital, isn't it? And so many people, we're not even taught people's history at school so often anymore. I know I never did, and I did A-level history and was passionate like you about history, but I never learnt anything about people's history, Labour history, because we weren't taught it.
Well, it was looked at something that wasn't quite things we should do. It was just all local stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But when you think that Merthyr was making cannons for the French and the British during the Napoleonic Wars, you know, our coal fueled the Titanic. Went around the world in post, you know, the Falkland Islands was a coaling station, basically. You know, it's an international story. A group of NUM, South Wales Miners Federation representatives went to Moscow to meet Stalin.
Yeah.
One of them, Lewis Jones, refused to stand up when Stalin came into the room because he didn't believe in bosses. He didn't believe in leaders.
I love that.
So he wouldn't stand up. He was lucky he wasn't actually a Georgian or a Russian, or he would probably
he would have been off.
He also was involved with the Spanish Civil War. People went from the valleys over the Pyrenees, pretending they were going to watch a rugby match, and ended up, on the front line. And I interviewed a few of them before, but most of them, they all died now, I think. You know.
Do you have that oral history material then, Kerry?
There is quite a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
We have a bit of trouble with the museum because they don't quite. We haven't got the museum should have a large, flourishing oral history department.
Absolutely.
We have got oral history office here, but they don't make it easy for you. So, to me, oral history should be me with a camera, me interviewing, a cameraman, and then when he goes back, it's transcribed straight away.
Yeah.
Because if they don't transcribe it straight away, I've sometimes got to tell them, because I've had transcriptions done months after, and when you read it, they haven't understood.
No, I know.
You know, so it needs to be done straight away with the interviewer.
Yeah.
And then it needs to have a good archiving system so you can get it back out, but also to be used again as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, we don't tend to do that very much. I've been doing one on Aberfan. Aberfan was a subject that I didn't really want to touch, really, because it is quite emotive. I got 3 grandkids under 11. But anyway, the National Museum obtained a clock. I don't know if you've seen it. It was stopped at 13 minutes past 9. Well, the approximate time of the disaster was 9:15. So this clock was found in the rubble, and then it was donated to St. Fagans. But up to then, I'd never been offered anything 3D from Aberfan. You know, we had the reports and newspaper stuff and that, but no 3D stuff. But from there, it came out of the woodwork, you know. And again, it was useful to have local knowledge and be local, because the people tended to talk to you more than they would if I was somebody if I was an academic from outside.
Sure,
you know?
Exactly.
I know it sounds awful, but that is the case.
No, it's true. I think.
They trust you. They haven't got to describe things, and they call you love and things like that. Like,
they recognise you. Yeah.
I tell you, the first when I had objects off was a Mr. Gareth Jones, and I had his phone number. And he said, would you like to give him a ring? He's got some stuff. So I phoned up the house and left an answer phone message because he wasn't there. 10 minutes later, the phone rang, so I picked it up, thinking, okay, because I was a bit trepidatious about talking to him, and he was a survivor. He'd come out of the school at 5, he's 5-year-old, and I was expecting it was going to be a bit poor-faced and what have you. And he said, I don't care, what do you want to know, but, you know. So, huh?
This is such an important history, though, isn't it? That
it's fabulous. Well, and I did, the Aberfan has been in my mind now for a bit. I don't know whether we'll actually be able to do an exhibition on it. There's a bit of a thought within the museum. It's too sensitive subject to touch. But what I was looking at, although I have interviewed people who lost family and what have you, I was looking mainly at the rescue work. So I was talking to Mines Rescue people, boys from Merthyr Colliery who went up there about 9:45 in the morning when they were called up to dig. They were the ones who got the bodies out and cleared the school. So I've talked to those. I've talked to a retained fireman who was there. And funny enough, the retained fireman I spoke to was also on the scene when the taxi driver was killed on the edge of the Valley Road during the strike. So he'd been to Aberfan as a rescuer and also was in the, involved with the strike as well. I will tell you what he told me. It's incredible.
These histories are so important, aren't they? And I've just been struck by a few of the chat comments that have been coming in, Kerry, and which I saw coming in about, this is pretty much what we should be learning, surely, in GCSE or GCE history, as it was, in my day. And it's about kind of learning from people who, well, they're still around. and most of the subjects that we're learning quite often are irrelevant for a lot of the students, unless they have some kind of understanding of it as a lived experience. So I think it's really important.
But say Aberfan is important because, of course, it's got environmental issues in here.
Yeah, exactly.
But the growth of industry. It's got
indeed.
The greed of industry.
Absolutely.
It's all there, and it's all in a local story.
Absolutely.
The retained fireman told me, because at that time there was earthquakes going through Syria and Egypt. Remember, there was buildings collapsing all over the Middle East and what have you.
Yeah.
And he said, watching that, he said that's 1,000,000 times worse. But he could imagine, because he'd been in a quite a small disaster, Aberfan. It was 2 streets basically, wasn't it? But he said it made him think that these weren't just casualty figures. This was 2,000 people died here. He was imagining every one of those.
Yeah.
They were human beings. They, like the little kiddies who were killed in Aberfan, they had a future to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could have been anything. They'd also had a past. One little girl who died, and we've got one of her dolls, but she was a bridesmaid the week before. So we got the bridesmaids album that she was a bridesmaid in, and what have you. And when I said to the family, are you sure you want to, pick this out? She said, yes, we want Norma to be remembered.
Yeah.
So we remember them by the object. Again, back to the objects, and very powerful, very important.
Yeah. But that's the point there about that Rebecca made earlier as well about, these objects are ambivalent, aren't they? They represent pain and loss, but also memory as well, and remembering.
The art quite very powerful. We got a miner's lamp that came in. Well, we got lots of these miner's lamps, right? But this one, it got a massive dent on it, and the chap who was carrying it was killed underground by a journey of drums. So that it isn't the lamp that's the object, if you know what I mean. It's the story behind the lamp that's the object. We did another one that was carried, which came out of a disaster in Albion in 1897, which later on became part of the first Hunger March because it was present. I tell you, I can talk all day, right? But I was phoned up by an undertaker's firm from London who said they'd had this miner's lamp hanging up in their kitchen for years, and would we like it? And in the bonnet of the lamp, there was a letter from the Lord Secretary of Marty Colliery in 1928, saying, following your good services during the late troubles we had during the Hunger March, because 2 Welsh Hunger Marches died at the end of the March. One died of pneumonia because apparently it was pouring down with rain at the time in Trafalgar Square, and he died of pneumonia. But another one was knocked down by a London bus. So the Unemployed Miners Association, or the marchers, had 2 dead bodies on their hand, which they had to get back to South Wales. And apparently there's a lot of undertakers in London were very socialist in mind.
Yeah.
And they paid for it all, got the coffin, and the Lord Secretary was giving them an historic lamp to thank them for their services.
That's really powerful. I'm just struck as well, by how these kind of artifacts, they only mean something if they're interpreted, don't they, in some way?
It could mean anything. It's a pencil.
What I mean.
What does that mean? But if it's a pencil from A.J. Cook in 1926, it's a story altogether.
But it's like you're more than a curator. You're interpreting these.
I'm the people's remembrancer.
You are the people's remembrancer. I'm gonna, because there's some great comments in the chat, Kerry, and I know we've got just a bit of time. Can I open this out a little bit now? I'm sure there are people who might want to talk to you. I mean, I've got some brilliant chats in there about the arts and the importance of local theatre and drama, which you mentioned as well, particularly apropos Colin Harley, and the importance of that Joe points out about people remembering their own stories. You have through drama and music groups, etc. But I'm just going to open it out and see if anyone's got any questions for you, if I may. Does anyone have questions for Kerry that you've not mentioned in the chat, or you just want to ask?
You can cut the silence with a knife.
Everybody's gone quiet on me.
Yeah.
Tim.
Oh, Tim will. What do you want, Chops?
Hiya, Kerry.
I like that.
Yeah, just really interested in what you had to say, and I think that there are a few people that link what you've said to the first presentation this morning about the importance of community activism.
Yeah.
And there's a poem by Robert Morgan that talks about the importance of the South Wales Miners Library.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And perhaps I can circulate that after. And he talks about the importance of community learning. And then I remember when we were at university together reading something by Gwyn Thomas, where in the 1960s he was reflecting on the community activism in 1926 when he remembered the jazz bands.
Yeah.
And Gwyn Thomas said that now the fervour has died, and a gentle healing hedonism has taken the place of the community activism.
Mm.
And the last person that takes me to is Tyrone O'Sullivan in 1998, when we went to the rededication of Oakdale Miners Institute in St. Fagans. And Tyrone O'Sullivan gave everybody a good telling off, saying that we, the working people, had let class consciousness and community activism slip away.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you think that's true. Was it the gentle healing hedonism, or was it the aftermath of what Gwyn Alf called Blwyddyn y Plague, the year of the plague in 1979?
It's difficult, really, because I don't think things like the NUM don't exist anymore. And as you know, the NUM was part of the Slava movement and Coleg Alech and all this type of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody saying up the Maesteg Valley, about 20 years ago, there was a Ku Klux Klan person that had moved into the Garw Valley, right? And he was being visited by all sorts. And a bloke in the street was complaining about it. He said, if the NUM was here now, they'd have chased him out. So we do need those structures and that to sort of fight back. We need to organise in a way. The organising these is difficult when a lot of people basically go to work, watch telly, and then, they don't really take any part sometimes. Like I said, our village is dead. Well, 40 years ago, God, it was like the Wild West up there. But it's gone quiet. There seems to be more people about, but they're all more or less worried about keeping their jobs, I think, rather than and being active. Is to get people together. How do you do it? Actually, Reform have done this really well. Why do the right wingers manage to do this and we can't?
That's what I was going to say. If we still had structures like the NUM, then I don't think Reform would be making the gains they've made now.
Oh, they destroyed it.
And as you know, I live in Pontypool, and in Torfaen we've had several council by-elections, and in each of those by-elections, Reform has either won the seat or came a close second. So I'm really worried about what's going to happen next May.
The thing is that a lot of people who voted for him have forgotten our past and our anti-fascism. You know, I've been told apparently the De Winton Field in, when was it, 1930s? Mosleyites were kicked out. Aberdare, they were kicked out of the park and drowned by loudspeakers. You know, even the years of the Valley sheep should not be sullied by the voice of the fascists, wasn't it? Yeah. Who was that? Knight and Bevan, was it? I think, yeah.
And now, again, if you think back to the Brexit vote, in Blaen y Gwent and Torfaen, 60% of the people who voted to leave. Yeah. And these are areas that were some of the biggest recipients of European money.
Yeah, like that famous one on the television, and you sit in between the new archives, the college building and the car parks, and saying, what have the EC ever done for us? And the bloke said, looked around, he said, what about this lot then? And I don't know what, didn't he say or something? We would have done that anyway. Well, I bloody don't.
Yeah. And they also interviewed an elderly lady in the middle of Ebbw Vale, and they said to her, did you vote? And she said yes. How did you vote? I voted to leave. Why? And she said, we want our steelworks back.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, an interesting one, because a chap called Gareth Butcher, who was ex-pitman in Marine Colliery, but he later became what do you call it? A house agent in Abergavenny, you know. And Nigel Farage visited Abergavenny as part of, because the amount of money that Reform put into the valleys, into places like Caerphilly, that is absolutely immense. There was people coming from all over the country. And I think that's why they didn't win, because they peed a lot of people off, you know. And I don't know if you noticed, after they closed the building down, it said, "No, F off." Somebody had written on the building.
Yeah, yeah.
But there was Gareth Butcher now was very, very militant during the strike, very, very left wing. But of course, he's a state agent, isn't he? So anyway, Farage came in with he described them as two guerrillas. Big 6-foot strapping blocks. He takes his own bodyguards around, doesn't he, with him? So Farage was going this, and he said, look, and he was being very polite to him. He said, look, we're not interested in what you have to say, you know. So Farage was going up, and they went. But one of the guerrillas stayed behind and stared at Gareth, who was about 5'2", right? But built like a power forward. And he said, if you don't F off, he said, I'll rip your effing head off. And the other guerrilla went as well. So there is people out there who are willing to fight back, but you need to organise them and to get away with the fact that the Labour Party is useless, the 20 miles an hour speed limit, blah, 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 all this crap. But they're voting then for people who are very rich, you know. But hell, don't you understand? These people are not socialists that you're voting for.
Precisely.
You know. And they're not going to do
anything. Of education,
anyway.
though, isn't it? Going back to what we were saying, Kerry, you wouldn't have got that with people who've been through a system that enabled them to think about this.
Yeah.
In a broad sense.
No, Ian, it's just knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, anyway, I know. Yeah. Ian, can I bring you in?
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Kerry, for your passion and warmth and energy. I'm in Nottingham, and yeah, somebody has to be. Yeah. I'm a bit worried about what's coming down the track. So I get involved with activist groups, trying to keep an eye on what's happening in economic development. And one of the big things, of course, is data centers and the prospect of artificial intelligence, which we've got one that's appeared out of the blue, which apparently is going to need 3 small modular reactors simply to power it. And there's going to be a bigger one at Ratcliffe-on-Soar. And at the same time, they're closing courses at Nottingham University in English and all the arts subjects. And I'm just a bit worried that where are people going to find the culture and the history from when these things kick off.
Yeah, we lose no past. And it, like I said, I come from the valleys where these things were important. Things were handed down. You did get the stories coming in. You did know that your grandfather, assaulted police at 11-year-old and stuff like that. It was part of the whole thing to fight back. And this is not the way. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Like I said, you do need, the biggest problem we got is employment. It's not automatic that you're going to get a job somewhere. With the steelworks, the coal mines, if you were like me and not very bright, you could get in, you know what I mean? So anyway, so you had a job to start with, and then you could think about education later on and do that. But it's actually getting that job now. I don't know what's going to happen. I know the population is decreasing, which is probably the reason why we need immigrants coming in on a regular basis, because I'm not against immigration. I think we need immigration, to be honest with you. If we don't have immigration, we're all going to be 80 and 90-year-old with nobody to look after us. So we need, people coming in. But I just, to be honest, I don't know what the answer is. We're going through like a 1930s period, if you know what I mean. After 1926 strike and the 30s, the fight backs in the 30s. And the only way we got out of it was a world war. And the way NATO is carrying on at the moment, I think they're itching to have a world war. Whatever you think of Putin, it's not Putin that wants to invade bloody France. It's actually, the NATO wants to fight because you make money from armaments anyway. So that's one thing. And I'm afraid that somebody's going to think, well, one nuclear weapon, God, that's not going to hurt, is it? And then the whole world then we're up to our neck in ashes. But who knows? It's a bit of a worry.
So to kind of bring us to a bit of a kind of hope, Kerry, mainly because of time, because I think a number of people are going to have to go about 12:30, and I think we said we'd finish around now or fairly shortly. And it's really hard to kind of know how to summarize and feedback from both presentations. And I guess we could feel dispirited, particularly with what we've just been talking about. But I'm incredibly minded of the fact that you're keeping a flame burning through the work of the Big Pit. I know my brother's trying to keep that whole flame burning through his filmmaking that we looked at in September. And I think this kind of really typifies the importance of the work that we're doing in terms of oral history and the arts. And it is just about remaining resilient, but particularly resisting that complete loss of hope, which I think the Portland Inn project really brilliantly exemplified. So I don't know whether Ian wants to come back in just to kind of go back to your original presentation in and
I think you've said it, Sharon. Although I think that sums it up, and I think that the span between the two and the emphasis on histories, and I think what both Kerry said and what Anna and Becky said, and the chat thread around the different forms and places of oral history. And I think you and I have said, haven't we, in the past, alongside our discussions, we're both individual members of the Oral History Society. And I know, I dip in a lot to stuff of theirs, but I think that ways of developing those oral histories, and in the chat thread again, I think Anna put in examples of what's developing in Stoke. And I think Kerry's point about however painful with something like Aberfan, but also other examples of as well, is so important, isn't it? Without doubt. And I think to just keep an eye on what is being developed and continue to share those examples.
Yeah, the willful remembering point, Kerry's role as people's rememberer, but also, the work that the Portland Inn project are doing in terms of not just remembering, but enabling people in that community to be agents in their own destiny and their own experience. And I think that's really powerful, that whole point about self-organization, which I think I said through the D. Hunter stuff at the beginning, but you've emphasized many times, Ian. I think that's really powerful. And that's the way that we fight if we can. And we fight by being together by being collective. This is a voice and a space. And I just think it's really important to remember that. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
And I bring Linden in. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks, Cherry, as well. Thanks to everybody. One of the things we need to do is to think about where this leaves us in terms of the work that we have to do and what form it should take. And I don't quite, there isn't time now and people have to go, it's 12:30, but I do think we need to give some serious attention. I did a note for the two of you, and then Ian circulated on some thoughts about politics, economics, our part in nature, which is linking back to something Kerry said, and what the way many young people are beginning to think about what we've done to the earth, and maybe a kind of resacralization of some kind. Another aspect is the need for more feminized politics, arguably, given the chaos on the left and its tendency to factionalism, sectarianism, and as Freud called it, the narcissism of small difference. I'll kill the person, he may be close to me, he often is he, but how dare he think that? So there are whole sets of issues here. But I suppose my concluding thought is that we mustn't ever lose our connection with the ground either, because that's one of the things that's come across very strongly. Whether it's the ground and the clay in Stoke or the mines, these are rich histories, and we must constantly refer back to them and learn from them. The learning never ends.
Thank you, Lyndon. I think this is a space of willful remembering, if I may just say that. Just I'm mindful of Joe's comment in the chat. We do need to continue to capture the best of the past. And it's not just to consign it to history. It is about influencing how we learn and enabling us for the future as well. So we will give this great thought after the event, and just to say that we'll circulate the recording as we always do, and the chat, because it's been a really rich chat, as Ian said, and we will give thought. And if you have thoughts, that's one thing I've kind of meant to say, and I know Ian suggested this. Let us know what your thoughts are about where we go next with the research circle. I think the points about taking international perspectives and learning from writers who have a more international kind of relationship is a really powerful and important one. So, and we have done that in the past as well here. So, yeah, I think that's it from my end. Ian, did you want to just say farewell?
Oops. Yes, I will. Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, thanks ever so much. It's been great, everybody. It's been a fascinating event, a really good way of ending our discussions during the year. And I think that, what we can do is write out, perhaps, I was thinking on Monday, just a note after we've had a pause to thank everybody. And as Sharon said, reflect on thoughts, let us know, and then we'll be back in touch again early in the new year in January. Yep. For all of the reasons that we've said today. So it's been excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye.